Hello, my name is Mike Schmidtke, and I'm a fisheries scientist with the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council. In this presentation, I'll be discussing Regulatory Amendment 37 to the Snapper Grouper Fishery Management Plan, which considers changes to black sea bass regulations in response to recent stock declines. Before we get into the amendment itself, I'll go over some housekeeping for the presentation and comment process that will be part of the public hearing webinars on November 3rd and 12th. First, I will review the amendment as developed to this point. Next, I'll pause to answer clarifying questions about the amendment. Finally, a council member will chair the comment portion of the meeting, calling on those who attend the webinars and want to provide verbal comments. The South Atlantic Council is one of 8 regional management councils that are responsible for managing fisheries in the U.S. exclusive economic zone, which ranges from 3 to 200 miles offshore. The South Atlantic Council is responsible for EEZ waters off North Carolina through the Florida Keys. Council members include recreational and commercial fisheries stakeholders, state marine agency representatives, and federal agency representatives. The 13 voting members include the Marine Agency representative from each state, 2 citizen representatives from each state, and the Southeast Regional Administrator of NOAA Fisheries. The Council's role in the management process is to develop management plans for South Atlantic fisheries and recommend regulations to NOAA Fisheries. NOAA Fisheries considers Council recommendations and implements fishery regulations for federal waters. For black sea bass specifically, the South Atlantic Council's jurisdiction includes federal waters south of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. Black sea bass north of Cape Hatteras are managed as a separate stock by the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council and Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. This amendment addresses management changes only for the South Atlantic stock of black sea bass. South Atlantic black sea bass were most recently assessed through CDAR 76 and the CDAR 76 update. This figure from the CDAR 76 update pretty well summarizes the recent trend of decline that's been observed for black sea bass since about 2010. This strong decline in abundance is supported by data from the Fishery Independent Southeast Reef Fish Chevron Trap Survey, catch levels, as well as comments from fishermen. Additionally, this decline is observed for nearly all ages, which are shown as different colors in the abundance figure, and not just the larger, older fish that are landed by the fishery. Similar declines in young fish and populations overall during the same time period have been observed in other winter-spawning reef-associated fish in the South Atlantic, like gag and scamp. Along with estimating population trends to see what the fishery looks like right now, stock assessments also project models forward, attempting to estimate sustainable levels of future catch. Projections of future catch can be very different depending on the conditions that modelers assume to be likely in the future. For an example from a more common type of forecast with variable condition assumptions, think about spaghetti plots used to predict the path of hurricanes. Predicting these future conditions can become even more difficult if the environment or population is changing or behaving in ways that are different than what's been observed in the past, or if important pieces of information like the size and condition of released fish are not available. Because of this uncertainty about likely future conditions and sustainable levels of harvest for black sea bass, several discussions and variations of the CDAR 76 and update models were developed over the course of 2.5 years. During this time, the Council also began work on Amendment 56 to implement changes based on the black sea bass stock assessment. In June of 2025, the Council's Scientific and Statistical Committee, or SSC, recommended catch levels based on the CDAR 76 update projections that would lower annual landings limits for black sea bass by over 90%, beginning in 2027. The Council noted several uncertainties that the SSC discussed during development of this recommendation, and felt that the magnitude of recommended change and the uncertainties about the modeling and projection of future catch levels necessitated further review and potential revision of the assessment. Additionally, the Marine Recreational Information Program is nearly finished with a study of its fishing effort survey that is expected to result in changes to recreational catch estimates. New recreational catch estimates are expected to be available for use in 2026. Before developing a rebuilding plan or other long-term management changes, the Council requested that these data be incorporated into the black sea bass stock assessment and projections. Amendment 56 was postponed until after completion of the revised assessment and will address longer-term management changes. Finally, the Council recognized the clear trend of persistent decline in black sea bass and decided that more immediate action was necessary. Therefore, they initiated Regulatory Amendment 37 to more immediately reduce fishing mortality and increase spawning and survival of juvenile black sea bass to the sizes where they can reproduce and be available to the fishery. Here we see the projected timeline for Regulatory Amendment 37. This process officially started in June of this year, and we are now in the public hearing step of the process. This means the Council has had some discussion, seen a draft of the amendment, and settled on the actions and alternatives that will be considered. The Council has selected preferred alternatives to indicate their stance on each action at this point. However, the final decisions have not yet been made. Through public hearings, the Council seeks input from stakeholders on which of the alternatives that are included in the amendment should be recommended for implementation. Additionally, the Council is developing rationale for their final decisions, so they are looking to gather information on why a particular alternative should or should not be implemented, so they can include that reasoning with their discussion and recommendations. The Council will make their final decisions on this amendment at the December 2025 meeting in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. If the Council approves the amendment for submission to the Secretary of Commerce at this meeting, they will then direct staff to finish up the amendment with their final decisions and submit it to be considered for implementation. NOAA Fisheries would then undergo their rulemaking and review process before the regulations become effective. If all steps happen according to schedule, the Council's intent is for regulatory changes from this amendment to be effective during 2026. Over the following slides, I'll show the 4 actions included in this amendment, along with the alternatives being considered for each. As you view these actions, you can consider that the Council is seeking answers to 2 main questions. First, which alternative or alternatives should be selected as preferred under each action? Second, why should the Council select this or these alternatives rather than another? Action 1 considers establishing sector annual catch targets, or ACTs, and revising in-season accountability measures, or AMs, for each sector. To address each of these components, this action is divided into 3 sub-actions. 1 to establish the ACTs for both sectors, 1 to change the in-season AM for the commercial sector, and 1 to change the in-season AM for the recreational sector. Each sub-action has 2 alternatives. Alternative 1 for all sub-actions would maintain current management, which does not have ACTs and manages sectors to their respective annual catch limits. Preferred Alternative 2 for all sub-actions would establish sector ACTs and revise the in-season AMs to manage both sectors according to their respective ACT. Preferred Alternative 2 was developed to set the ACT at 50% of the average landings from the most recent 5 years of data available. Year ranges were from 2019 through 2023 for the commercial sector, and the fishing years beginning in 2019 through 2023 for the recreational sector. The years are formatted differently because the commercial sector's fishing year is the calendar year, while the recreational fishing year is from April through March. The beginning of the fishing year is when annual monitoring of landings relative to the catch level resets back to zero. The proposed annual catch targets are 48,557 pounds whole weight for the commercial sector and 63,143 pounds whole weight for the recreational sector. Predicted seasonal effects of managing to these targets are included in the amendment document and analyzed later in this presentation, as effects from other actions being considered are incorporated into the analyses. Action 2 considers establishing a spawning closure, during which time harvest or possession of South Atlantic black sea bass would be prohibited. Alternative 2 addresses the commercial sector, and Alternative 3 addresses the recreational sector. During earlier discussions for this amendment, the Council reiterated that this closure is meant to be a spawning closure, which is used to provide additional protection for fish during their spawning season. Peak spawning for black sea bass occurs between February and May. The decline of black sea bass has included a decline in recruitment, which is the production and survival of young fish to a size where they can spawn and be available to the fishery. The Council intends to increase spawning production by closing harvest of black sea bass and allowing greater survival during this time of year. Because the intent is to protect spawning fish, the Council decided that both sectors should be closed at the same time. The Council initially considered months that overlapped with the shallow water grouper closure, which is a spawning closure that is already in place for several species that are caught in similar locations as black sea bass. The Council then considered the specific dynamics of the black sea bass fishery and selected closure of both sectors from February through March as their initial preferred alternatives. Decision tools were developed by scientists at NOAA Fisheries to analyze the predicted effects of management actions on the commercial and recreational season lengths. The tools and instructions are available for public use on the Regulatory Amendment 37 public hearing webpage. Select results from those tools, which include considered and preferred alternatives, are included in this presentation. Seasonal effect predictions shown in this presentation are based on average sector monthly catch rates from the 3 most recent years of data. For Action 2, this table shows the predicted commercial closure date and number of commercial fishing days under each Action 2 commercial sub-alternative, as well as the Council's current combined preferred alternatives that close the commercial sector from February through March. Recreational effects are impacted by other actions considered in this amendment, so tables describing that sector are included later on in the presentation. All tables presented in Actions 2 through 4 assume management to the sector annual catch targets considered under Action 1. Under the Council's preferred spawning closure from February through March, the commercial sector is not expected to experience an in-season closure. Part of the reason for this is because February is typically one of the commercial sector's highest months for landings, the other month being January. A change in fishing behavior in response to the spawning closure could affect the realized commercial season length. Action 3 considers a reduction to the recreational bag limit, which is currently 7 fish per person per day. Information from the Marine Recreational Information Program and Southeast Regional Headboat Survey indicate that although the bag limit is currently 7 fish, over the most recent 5 years of data, the majority of recreational trips that caught black sea bass caught 1 or fewer per person on board. Additionally, with management to a lower catch level in the ACT being considered through Action 1, a lower bag limit would be necessary to extend the recreational season for black sea bass. The Council initially selected a 2 fish per person per day bag limit as their preferred alternative. Here we see results from plugging preferred alternatives from Actions 1 and 2, which were managing to the new recreational ACT and a spawning closure during February and March, into the recreational decision tool and varying the bag limit. Remember that the recreational fishing year begins in April, and the season end date is announced ahead of the season each year by NOAA Fisheries, based on the previous year's catch rates. Therefore, the dates shown here are not set dates for every management year moving forward. Keeping the current 7-fish bag limit is expected to result in a season that ends in mid-September with about 170 fishing days. Lowering the bag limit extends the season, with the number of fishing days maximized by a 1 fish per person bag limit, in which the recreational sector would be expected to be open all year, except February and March during the spawning closure. The Council's preferred alternative of a 2-fish bag limit is expected to result in a recreational season from April until early January. The actual end date would vary from year to year depending on the catch rates in the previous year. Action 4 considers a reduction to the recreational minimum size limit, which is currently 13 inches total length. Generally, a minimum size limit reduction is expected to reduce the recreational season length because anglers would catch keeper-sized fish more frequently. The Council considered this action as a potential way to reduce the number of black sea bass that are caught, released, and die from that process. 86% of black sea bass that are released by the recreational sector are estimated to survive. However, so many black sea bass are released by the recreational sector that the most frequent cause of fishing-related mortality for black sea bass is from fish that are caught, released, and die from that process. Alternative minimum size limits have a strong impact on the expected recreational season. The analysis shown here assumes the currently preferred alternatives from actions 1 through 3, along with the action 4 alternatives. Size information for how frequently undersized fish are caught came from state at-sea headboat observers during the 3 most recent years of data. Under these conditions, a reduction to a 12-inch minimum size limit is expected to result in a recreational season that is less than half the length expected for a 13-inch minimum size limit. The Council selected keeping the current 13-inch minimum size limit as its current preferred alternative, discussing that the large decline in the expected number of fishing days is not worth the benefit of retaining smaller black sea bass. The Council is seeking comments on whether they should continue developing this amendment with the current preferred alternatives, or if any other alternatives should be selected as preferred. As you prepare your comments, again, please consider responding to the following questions. First, which alternatives should be selected as preferred under each action? And second, why should the Council select this or these alternatives rather than others? The Council accepts comments via several avenues. Verbal comments can be provided at public hearing webinars held on November 3rd and November 12th at 6 p.m. Written comments can be submitted online using the Regulatory Amendment 37 comment form on the Council's website. Written comments can also be submitted via mail or fax using the information shown on the screen. All comments must be submitted by 5 p.m. on Friday, November 14th. If you have any questions about the amendment, you can contact me, Mike Schmidtke, using the information shown on the bottom left. This concludes the recorded presentation. Thank you for your time, attention, and interest in South Atlantic Council Fisheries Management.